Cool. Good afternoon and welcome to the Composting and Mulching Basics webinar hosted by the Roseville Utility Exploration Center and the Environmental Utilities Department. My name is Braden Mitchell and I'm the Senior Interpretive Services Specialist at the Utility Exploration Center. For those of you who may not know us, we're part of our utility departments here in Roseville, California. Now, all of our utilities are municipally owned and operated, and those include solid waste, stormwater, wastewater, water, and electric. Now, the Utility Exploration Center is a one-of-a-kind environmental learning center focused on bringing visitors information on protecting our natural resources. Our topics include energy efficiency, renewable technology, recycling, waste reduction, and of course, water conservation. We offer school programs, events, a free visitor center, workshops, and webinars just like this one. Unfortunately, right now, due to COVID, our visitor center is closed, but we're hoping to be able to reopen soon. And when we do, I invite all of you to come out and enjoy our visitor center and explore the Roseville utilities with us, because together we can build a sustainable community. Now, before we launch into our topic for the day, I want to go over a couple housekeeping things. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post the recording of this webinar on our website, which is roseville.ca.us/gardening workshops in about a week. So again, we'll have that live video posted in about a week. We also have the ability for you guys to ask us questions. You can see right now on the screen that in your screen that you're looking at, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a little Q&A box, and that's circled with red on the PowerPoint. When you click that box, a side panel opens up. In the very bottom where that red arrow is, there's a button that says Ask a Question. Just click that button and you can simply ask your question. What we're going to do is we're going to gather all those questions. We'll be able to ask some of those live to our presenters at the end of our workshop. But if we don't get to your question, don't worry. Our presenters are going to review every question that was brought in today, and they're going to respond to those, and we'll post that question and response for everybody to be able to read on that same website. So ask your questions as they come up. Now, our presenters today are Kathy Netto and Becky Fritchie. Both Kathy and Becky are Placer County Master Gardeners. They have a wealth of knowledge and honestly absolutely love doing these composting and mulching workshops. We always have a great time when we do these together, and I think it's time for me to turn it over to them. So Kathy, are you ready?
I'm ready. Good morning, fellow gardeners, and welcome to Composting Basics. I'm Kathy Netto, and I will be talking about composting, and my partner Becky Fritchie will come on when I'm done and talk about mulching. So let's get started on this adventure. Who are Master Gardeners? Master Gardeners, we first of all are volunteers, and we extend research-based information so that you can have a sustainable garden and also composting. We present accurate, impartial information to home gardeners, and we help you to make informed gardening decisions. Here's where you can find us. We're online in the media, and we do have some special publications. Right now, you can find us at our hotline by calling the number on your screen, or you can submit your questions online, and following is our website. You can find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We often have articles in the Gold Country Media newspapers. We publish our own quarterly newsletter, and of course, you can find us in our award-winning garden guide and calendar. During the normal operating times, you can find us at these various locations, but right now we're online, and we sure do look forward to seeing you in person again. So let's talk about why we should compost. Composting diverts all of that stuff from our landfill, and it extends the life of our landfill. by reducing organic matter in our landfill, we can save on our water table. We reduce the amount of pollution that goes into the air, and you can save money by making compost at home. And when we use that compost, we improve our soil structure. Residents of Placer County need to compost. And I'm sorry, I don't have more current information, but as of 2014, we threw away 213 tons of garbage. Do you realize 1 pound per day per resident? And the green waste, 49 tons of green waste. A lot of that is compostable. We can leave it in our yard, we can compost of it. Some of it we do need to send on, and we'll talk about when that is appropriate. But just remember, compost happens. And Felder Rushing, who is a composting guru, says his 2 rules: stop throwing that stuff away and pile it up somewhere and let it decompose. Here's the process that we talk about: organic matter composition. We talk about carbons, which are browns, nitrogens, which are your greens. You need microorganisms, macroorganisms, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. You're going to need water, oxygen, and temperature for the process to start. So let's start with our greens, or the nitrogen. This is what it needs to get this pile started cooking and keep it hot. For example, you can put in vegetable and fruit scraps, alfalfa, coffee grounds. While they are brown, coffee grounds are a source of nitrogen. You can use manures. In fact, manure should never be put straight in your garden. That should always go to your compost bin. And you can use alfalfa, hay, and things like that. Anything like that that you can put in. You can use, but you need browns too. Organic matter. Things that are brown are usually dry, dead things, like leaves in the fall. We usually have tons of those. Straw and sawdust, but sawdust only from natural wood sources, because a lot of times things, when we have sawdust from plywood and other things, they tend to have glues and chemicals that we really do not want in our compost bins. You can use wood chips, corn stalks, cardboard or paper, cereal boxes, Kleenex boxes. All of those are considered a really good source of brown. So what can you put into the pile? You can put your grass clippings in there, your yard waste. You can put leaves and pine needles, but pine needles have a little bit tendency to be kind of waxy and tough, so run those over with the mower and break them up. They'll compost a little bit better. You can put vegetable trimmings from your kitchen, food scraps, eggshells, but a tip on eggshells: kind of grind them up a little bit before you put them in there, especially if you have skunks in your area, because they tend to like to dig for those. Wood chips that you have shredded up to size, newsprint, and sawdust. All of those will make a good balance for you. But there are some things that we really want to avoid putting in our pile. Diseased plants. Most home compost bins cannot get hot enough to take care of that diseased plant, and you don't want to run the risk of reinfecting your garden. So things like your diseased plants, your plants with severe insect attack, all of these things are going to go into your green waste. They will go out to the dump where it can be cycled, ground up, and it can get hot enough there to take care of it. You don't want to put ivy, morning glory, or succulents, because if you put succulents and those things in there, you're going to have 1,000 new very best friends very soon. Watch out for weeds like Bermuda grass, oxalis, or cheeseweed. They don't decompose well, and Bermuda grass, that's just heaven for that because it grows by rhizomes and it'll just take off. We never put dog or cat manure in a compost bin. They are meat eaters and their waste can contain pathogens that might make us sick. So that's best just to put in the garbage. You don't put meat, dairy, or fish scraps in. While yes, they are organic, they can create problems like odor, attract dogs, rats, and other critters we would really like to keep out of our compost bins. So avoid those. And wood ash. I know we've been having fires this season and we clean out our fireplace, but avoid putting that wood ash in there. That wood ash, while it is a really valuable resource, it tends to take and make our compost very alkaline, almost to the point where it becomes like lye. So hang on to the wood ashes. When the compost is all done with its process, then mix it in with the done compost and you should be fine. Making a pile. There's some important considerations. Your pile should be 3 by 3 by 3, and that's so that you can get it hot enough, but not bigger than 5 by 5 by 5, unless you live out on some property and you have a tractor that you can go and you can scoop and you can turn it over with a tractor. We can keep it small. Most of us are going to be doing this in our backyard. You have to think about, do you have all the organic material you need to create one batch? That's to fill up a bin 3 by 3. Or will you be adding to it continuously? Have you chopped up your material? When we chop up that material into smaller pieces, it allows it to decompose a little more quickly. Moisture and aeration. Now our rule on that is you want your compost to be damp like a well wrung out sponge. You never want it soggy or too dry. Too soggy and it'll start to stink. Too dry and the compost process really kind of stops. And with composting, you don't need to spend a small fortune on tools. A really good spading fork, and that's one with the 4 tines on it, and they're kind of square. And I find that works the best for compost turning. Using pitchforks or hay forks, sometimes all that ends up doing is skewering the things in there and they kind of stick on it. So using your compost fork or spading fork would be great. Choosing a system. Okay, what's your goal for composting? You think about, are you going to make tons of compost to use for your garden? Are you an avid gardener? Are you an urban homesteader? What is your goal? What are you going to do with your compost? Do you want to just make a little bit? You want to have some way to recycle? You want to teach your family about sustainability and recycling? So what is your goal? Are you going to do hot composting or cold composting? And we're going to talk a little bit more about each one of those. You need to figure out what your goal is and then figure out which system you want to use. You also want to put some plan into what kind of a bin do you want to use. You can see here we have some 3-bin systems, a tumbler, little earth machine thing, and you can even make them out of free material like pallets and wire and stuff. So if you want just a little bit, you have a small yard, a commercial product like the earth machine or a tumbler might work for you. But for me, I make a lot of compost. So I have a 3-bin system that I put a lot of material in. I compost horse manure and my kitchen scraps and my yard waste. So I have a big composting system because I want to make the most that I can. If you want a little bit, then just, one of the earth machines where it has a little door, and as it breaks down, you can kind of scrape it out at the bottom. So it's all a part of what is your goal. So let's talk about hot composting. First of all, you need a whole lot of material to get started. You want to start the whole thing as a batch, but not just, dumping it willy-nilly in there. You want an equal amount of greens and browns by volume. Your greens and your browns. So think of this, and I usually demonstrate this with 5-gallon buckets. You have your buckets and you fill it one up with greens and you fill one up with browns. You notice it's like the volume's not the same. To get the equal amount of browns by volume, you really have to kind of crush that all on down and fill that way up. That's equal amounts by volume. And you mix that in there. And as you're putting that in, you're getting it damp in between, spraying it in between, because that'll get those layers efficiently wet. If you wait and try to do it all at once at the end, it doesn't tend to get that middle part as damp as it really should be. Your pile should, if you're starting one for a hot compost, not smaller than 3 by 3 by 3. That is the optimal amount of room needed to get the process going, to allow the heat to, come up and allow to have enough microbes and things in there to get that process going. You need to keep it moist, like a well-wrung out sponge. You need to keep it aerobic, which means you need to keep stirring it so that the air can get in, turning it weekly or even more. Using a compost thermometer, it's looks like a big long meat thermometer, and you put it right in the middle, and you want to keep it at that optimal temperature of 140 to 160 to make sure all those microbes are working. And you're going to make one pile, and you're not going to add anything else to it. You're going to let it sit there. You're going to maintain it. You're going to take care of it, babysit it, turn it, check its temperature until it is completely finished. But most of us that are home composters are going to use this static or cold method. We're going to add a little bit at a time as they're available. You've got some kitchen scraps, so you're going to go out and you're going to put that in. And you're going to add some browns in. But when you're adding a little at a time, we're going to avoid what we call the dump and run, where it's raining and it's cold and you're going out to the compost bin with your bucket and you're dumping it in and you head back into the house. We want to avoid that. Maybe you might want to keep next to your compost bin, maybe some shredded paper, some dry leaves, straw, things that are going to be carbon-based materials. So when you dump in your vegetable scraps, you're going to take equal amounts of brown and you're going to put that in, cover it up. You're going to mix that, turn that in. You don't want to leave food scraps on top. Food scraps on top can attract things that are unwanted, like rats, skunks, and of course, flies. And you want to make sure that you're keeping it moist, like a well-wrung out sponge. How long does it take? This is one of my most frequently asked questions. How long does composting take? Well, my answer is it depends on the moisture content. Is it moist like a well-wrung out sponge? Or is it gotten kind of dry? Do you have enough oxygen in there? Are you mixing it up? Are you taking the center part and moving it to the outside and the outside to the center so that you can keep the oxygen flow in? And that's called active aeration. Or are you just doing passive aeration, where you have a bin that has the open sides and you're just kind of letting nature take its course? How hot your pile is will determine on how fast things will decompose also. What you're putting into the pile, the particle size and the moisture. If you're putting, like, for example, a whole watermelon in, you just kind of put it in there. That whole watermelon is going to take a lot longer to decompose as opposed to chopping it up into some small bits. And of course, we have to think of the seasons. Right now, we're kind of in our rainy, cold season, and things slow down. The microbes are getting a little chilly and they don't want to work as hard. And also for seasonal consideration is you may want to, in the winter months, keep a cover over your compost bin. You don't want it to get too wet. You know, you've spent a lot of time and effort building this beautiful pile, and you want to keep it covered enough so that it doesn't take and the rain hits it, makes it soggy, and then out the bottom, there goes all your nutrients. So you want to keep it damp, but cover it in the winter. And in the summer, a shady spot is an excellent place for a compost bin because it won't dry out as fast. And one thing I found that in the summer months when it's getting really hot and I want to cover, I found just a piece of burlap over the top damp will keep it help keep that moisture in. And guess what? That burlap will decompose also, and it's a source of carbon. Our compost pile has got critters, and these are critters that we want. We talked about the organic matter and the composting. We're going to talk a little bit about the microorganisms and the macroorganisms that make up composting. Macroorganisms are the big guys. There are ants and centipedes and snails and sow bugs and all those things that as you're turning your bin, you see, what's that in there? What's that in there? All of those are part of the decomposition process. If you start seeing way too many ants in there, then your pile might be a little bit dry. But all of those, don't worry about if you see bugs and stuff in there. You need that in there because those are helping to decompose things, and they are dependent on the little guys. It's an ecosystem, and think of it as a city. You know, we've got all these things in there. You know, you've got your food scraps and you've got your actinomycetes and your fungus and your bacteria all breaking this down. And then you've got some little guys like springtails and beetles and things like that that are feeding on that. And then you've got your larger things that are feeding, and somebody's always eating somebody and somebody's always pooping. So it's a whole system, and each one of these depends on the other. They're all a part of that system, whether we can see them or not. Bacteria is an extremely important part of composting. It's the powerhouse that breaks down. They break down plant matter and they create carbon dioxide and heat. So that's where you get the heat from a composting system. It's not from being in the sun. It's from that bacteria doing their job. And in the absolute right conditions, under the best conditions you can think of, bacteria can double every hour. So it's kind of amazing that these little tiny microscopic things are creating something so wonderful. Now, when we're done with compost, you know, I get asked, well, how do you know it's done? Compost is done when you can't recognize anything anymore. You know, you look in there, you take a scoop, and you can't tell that you've added oranges or apple cores or twigs and leaves and stuff when it's all broken down and it's unrecognizable. Also, your compost is done when you cannot get the temperature back up if you're doing hot composting. You know, it's cooled down, it's not going to go back up. And one of the things that I do, because I'm kind of compost nerd, is I sift my compost. When I'm taking it out, I made a homemade sifter, I put it on there, I sift out my compost, and then anything that's a little bit too big or hasn't finished decomposing goes back in the bin to finish. And so then I'm left with this beautiful smelling, earthy smelling, fine compost. And I put it in a container and I let it sit for a little bit, let it age a little bit. And that's how you harvest your compost. Some of you that are going to be doing add as you go, you're going to start noticing if you lift up, some of them have a little door, you lift that little door up or you lift up your bin, you're going to see it on the bottom. You're going to start getting a little bit of compost at the bottom. So compost is going to happen. Using your finished compost, you can incorporate it into the soil. You know, when you go to plant your vegetables, mixing it in, make sure it's getting down to the root. You can top dress it on the top. You can use it almost like a mulch on top. You can use it with your container mixes, with your potting mix for containers. You can also make an extract, or use the word loosely, a tea, because that gives better description. You can take that compost, you can put it in a 5-gallon bucket, let it sit, let it make, you know, all that extract, all that good stuff. And you can take and you can use that as a way to use your compost, especially if you only have a little bit. Making an extract in a bucket of water is a great way to extend out and get the best bang for your buck on composting. Now that we've talked about composting, I'm going to turn over the next portion of this to Becky, and she's going to talk about another equally important thing called mulch.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me get my notes all set up. There we go. So today we're going to talk about mulch. My name is Becky Fritchie, and I've been a master gardener since 2015. And this is one of my favorite topics because you've gone and you've made the compost, you've enriched your soil with it, and now you need to protect your soil. What is mulch? Well, mulch, you could either use something organic or inorganic. Leaves, bark nuggets, shredded bark, rice straw, rock, gravel, rubber, pine needles, like Kathy mentioned. And people worry about pine needles, but as they break down, they become neutral. Before I go on more about mulch, if you're concerned about flammability, don't use the rubber mulch or the shredded bark. Remember, rubber mulch is a petroleum-based product and highly flammable, and the shredded bark, it's because it's broken down into the little bits, is also highly flammable. So what does mulch do? It suppresses weeds, which for me, weeding used to be a therapy for me. Now that I'm older, I don't like it so much. So it does suppress the weeds. It conserves moisture, and what's happening is mulch holds moisture not only in itself, but it'll hold it in the ground by limiting evaporation. It moderates the soil temperature, so during the summer, your soil's not too hot, which is stressing your plants, and in the winter, it's going to help prevent the frost. Let's see, it prevents compaction. Now remember, we just had the rains. When that rain hits the ground, it's compressing your ground. It's causing it to compact. The mulch will break that impaction. It controls erosion for the same reason. It won't let your soil go washing down. And then the best part of mulch is, to me, is it's inviting worms, and the worms are going to be bringing in the good bacteria and everything that Kathy talked about. We want to make it a healthy city underneath that soil. Remember, nature does not like bare soil. Either you cover it with mulch or it's going to be covered with weeds, and none of us like weeds, right? So how much mulch should I use? The application depth is going to be between 2 and 4 inches, and you don't want it any thicker than that because it's going to hold the moisture and cause rot. And in the open spaces, they say 6 inches thick because remember, mulch does break down. And you're going to apply it 6 inches from your trunks and 12 inches from buildings. Again, it's because the mulch retains the moisture, and if it's too close to things, it's going to cause decay. When you're putting mulch around a tree, don't put it up against the trunk because the roots of your tree are going to be around the drip line and extend beyond the branches. So that's where you want your mulch to be. Okay, mulch care. Very similar to compost, you want, when you first put your mulch down, you want to water it and have it absorb the moisture and hold on to it. It helps it from blowing away. It helps it settle in. And again, you want it to hold that moisture to keep your soil just at the right temperature and to protect those worms that you're inviting in. When we aren't getting rain, make sure that you water your mulch for that same reason. You want it to hold that moisture in. Because mulch does decompose, It says add new mulch yearly to keep up the depth. Personally, my mulch lasts 3 to 5 years. So I just check your depth, make sure it's still between that 2 and 4 inches, and then just add as needed. One thing about mulch, it says allow leaves from trees and plants to drop where they are. And when you think about the forests, nobody's there raking up the leaves. It's a natural mulch. Well, we can do the same thing. If you've got trees that drop a lot of leaves, go over them with the mower at the mulching setting, and that'll break them out. You can use extra leaves in your flower beds and leave them on your grass, but make sure you don't smother your grass. And what's going to happen is microorganisms are going to be using those leaves. It's going to be feeding them and helping those microorganisms grow. What about mulching with rocks? And I know this is really popular, but I want you to, the pro about mulching with rocks, and I'm going to add rubber to this section also, is it lasts for years. Rocks and rubber are not organic and they don't decompose. If you've gone by those landscape companies that sell the rocks and things, you'll see that they come in a large variety of colors and they won't wash away when we have the heavy rains. But the con to these two products is they're inorganic, so they're not going to be providing any nutrients to your soil. The rubber mulch is made from shredded tires, and I'm like, phew, you know, I mean, it's great for a playground because you've got the open air, but do you want rubber mulch in your yard smelling like tires? But that's just my personal opinion. The big thing with rocks is it does hold on to the heat. So at night, the rocks don't cool off, and that's going to cause heat stress to your plants. Sure don't want that to happen. And if during the summer with both those products, because they do heat up, you're going to be spending more money on watering. You don't want to do that, right? Okay, I love this slide. This is called grass cycling. Great slide. Michigan State did a big study on grass cycling. And what that is when you mow your lawn, you're only going to remove a third of your grass, the tops. You're just going to top it off and let that grass fall back into your lawn. And the grass clippings are full of nutrition, especially nitrogen. What's nice is it can reduce your need to fertilize up to 25%. That saves money in buying fertilizer. These clippings attract worms, beneficial bacteria, and fungi. And it keeps grass out of the landfills. Now, according to our local landfill company, the waste management, the city of Roseville is going to be doubling its population by 2050. So the more that we keep out of the landfill, the better it is. Per CalCycle California, lawns generate approximately 6.5 tons per acre per year. So again, we want to break that cycle. When you do the lawn or the grass cycling, I want you to keep in mind it does not cause thatch. Thatch is the decomposing roots and stems of the grass that they sit on top of the soil. Now around here we have clay soil, and clay, you know, when you water, how the water just sits on top of it? Well, that's going to that's going to cause the rot, and that's what thatch is. And so going through your lawn and doing the plugs every so many years will help with that. So and we want to keep the microbial activity going, and that's why we do the grass cycling. I use it, and it's wonderful. So just a summary, the compost is your fully decomposed organic material that's worked into the ground. It's a wonderful product. It's fun to make. And then your mulch is going to go on top of that, and it's going to protect all that work that you just did. If you have questions, we're going to have questions with Braden. If you have questions for Master Gardeners, don't forget we have a hotline. Right now it's easiest to access it through our website. We have YouTube where you can see other gardening videos by Placer County MGs. And then, as Braden said, you're going to be able to download or access the YouTube channel in about a week. And we will have a copy of this presentation also on our website. Kathy, you want to come over? Braden, do you have questions for us?
Hey, first of all, Kathy, Becky, I want to say thank you so much for an amazing presentation. We did have some questions come in. I'm going to go through those here in a minute. It looks like we do have plenty of time left, so we should get through most. Again, just for everyone else to know, if we don't get to every single question, both Kathy and Becky have agreed to review all of the questions that came in and answer them, so we can post those question and answers on that same web page. That'll also have the recording of this event and the PowerPoint presentation, and of course some great handouts as well. So wealth of information. That website again is www.roseville.ca.us/gardening workshops. And I also posted that for everybody in our question and answer feed. All right, so let me go through. I think the first one here appears to be on composting. So Kathy, this will be for you. And that is, do you have any tips or tricks on how to prevent attracting rodents or other animals from invading your compost pile?
That's a great question. Attracting, to avoid rodents and other critters that you really don't want to have in your compost bin, you want to, if you're keeping the moisture level correct, damp like a well wrung out sponge, or, you're not putting things like meat, fish, bones, dairy in your compost bin, avoiding that and keeping it turned. If you have burrowing critters like gophers and stuff, you can put chicken wire or hardware cloth or some kind of metal on the bottom of your bin so that when it's sitting on the ground, they cannot burrow up in. But keeping it moist, avoiding certain things that you should not put in there, and keeping it turned will help avoid the rats and keep it from becoming a Hilton for them.
Great. I have, let's see, I'm looking at my list here. I have another one on composting as well. This one is specifically about the temperature of your compost and when to turn it. They write, I normally wait until the temperature starts to drop in my compost bin before turning them. Is that okay, or would it be better to turn weekly, like you said in your presentation?
You can do both. Turning weekly will work. I usually wait until the temperature tends to drop a little bit. Once it starts getting below that 140, that's kind of my clue to get out there and start turning. Either way, whatever works both best for you. There's not a given time that you have to, but when you're doing hot composting, that frequent turning is very important.
Great, thank you. Let me see if I can find another good question here for you. Oh, here's one for Becky. This is obviously about mulch. They were curious, how do you keep your mulch from blowing away, especially when blowing leaves?
Boy, that's a tough one, because it does. Now, when I put my mulch in, I did not put a garden strip down at the bottom of my sidewalk, and our neighbors' dogs run through it, so we always have mulch all over the sidewalk. Honestly, I don't know. The larger the bark, the easier it would be to rake your leaves off. But if your leaves aren't too thick, honestly, I would leave them and let them become a part of the mulch. They will break down fairly quickly. So I don't know if I answered your question or not. I hope so.
Great, thank you very much for that. I had another person asking specifically about compost bins. And they were wondering, is it possible to use a designated plastic trash bin as a compost container as opposed to purchasing a specified one? And if so, do you have a recommendation on how to prepare that?
Using a trash can as a bin, that's a great way to recycle something that you're no longer using. If you are a resident of the city of Roseville, you can get a free compost bin by contacting your waste management. What they've done, and kudos to them, is they've taken the old bins, they've cut the top off and the bottom off, and they have drilled holes in the sides to create compost bins. You certainly can do the other with a trash can that you're no longer using, but remember, you do want to try to keep it 3 by 3 by 3.
Excellent. And then we have another question specifically about the type of chips to be used for mulch. They asked specifically, what do you think about using bigger redwood chips as mulch?
I like that idea. The bigger the chip, the more moisture that it's going to hold, and also the less flammable that it is. So yeah, I do like the large redwood chips.
Excellent. It looks like a lot of compost questions today. I have another person that's asking, apparently they have a chicken coop, and they're wondering is it okay to add the soiled wood shavings into their compost bin? And would that be considered brown or green?
Excellent question. Adding those chicken shavings to your compost is an awesome way. It's going to be kind of a mixture of nitrogen and carbon. The chips are going to be carbon, but the chicken manure itself is a very valuable source of nitrogen. So it's kind of a balance in there of, if you have a lot of manure and not a lot of chips, you're going to want to add some, maybe some more brown, or if you have a lot of chips and not a lot of the manure, you may want to add some nitrogen in that. But that's an excellent source for your compost. And because chicken manure is hot, they call it a hot manure, never ever put it directly on your plants because it could burn them. Always goes into the compost bin.
Excellent. We have another question about putting down or using a different material as a weed barrier. So they're asking specifically, what do you think about using plain cardboard as a weed barrier?
I'm going to be talking about using cardboard as a weed barrier when we talk about replacing your lawn as a webinar here in October. Cardboard is excellent. I would top it with compost and then put the mulch on top of that, or vice versa. You can put the compost on the bottom and then put your cardboard down and then put mulch on top of that. That cardboard will break down. It takes about 3 months, and it will add nutrients to your soil. So cardboard, it is excellent. I will be talking, it's a part of sheet mulching. And if you layer your cardboard, I did it, about 5 years ago. And the area that I did it in, I still do not have weeds. So yeah, I do like the idea of cardboard. And I like it much better than weed cloth and such.
Excellent. It looks like we have just a couple more minutes, so hopefully we'll get 1 or 2 more questions in here. We had a question back into that compost world again. They were curious about including citrus in compost specifically. They say, I've heard that if you want to encourage worms in your compost, it's best to not include citrus. Is that true?
It depends on how much citrus you're putting in. If you are using an outdoor compost bin, then it's perfectly fine to put citrus in there. The worms can, have an area they can kind of come and go as they please. You should avoid it if you're going to do an enclosed worm bin where you're just composting with worms, because then that's too overpowering for them. But in a regular outdoor compost bin, the citrus will not be a problem for the worms because they can get away from it or move to a different corner or whatever in a big bin.
Awesome. Just had a couple more questions come in, so I'm just going to look through those really quick here. Oh, specifically on mulch, they were wondering, could they use a layer of bark, and is that also considered mulch?
You can use, yeah, you can use a layer of bark, but again, make sure that you put your layer down that's between 2 and 4 inches. It depends on the size of the bark. So yeah, yep, bark is a good mulch.
Awesome. I think I got time for probably about one more question. And we had a couple questions come in. A few people asked about using paper and cardboard that specifically has printing on it. They'd heard maybe you shouldn't use that kind of stuff like cereal boxes or newspaper. They wanted you to clarify that a little bit.
What we found out through research is that a lot of the printing now done on newspaper and boxes and stuff, that ink that they are using is more of a soy-based ink or vegetable-based inks. So they're not going to be a problem in your bin. The things that you do want to avoid are like the magazine covers, the slick, shiny stuff, or the Macy's ads and things, because that does have a chemical coating on it. So you want to avoid that, but using your cereal boxes and Kleenex boxes, things like that, that ink is not going to be a problem. Just remember to shred it up a little bit before you put it in your compost bin.
Excellent. And then one last question is specifically on your slide that we still have up on the screen right now. They want to know, what is that rot line?
Oh, that's an excellent question. The rot line is manned by our boss, Kevin Marini, who is our Jedi guru of all things composting. That line you can call for only for specific composting questions. During the COVID time, he may or may not be on that line, but you can always call our hotline number and ask those composting questions too if you can't get anybody on the rot line.
Excellent. Thank you again so much, Becky and Kathy. Really appreciate all of this great information you shared with us.
Well, thank you, Braden.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And folks, just so you know, again, we will be posting a copy of the recording of this webinar on our website, along with great handouts and the presentation itself, the PDF of the slides itself. So please check those out. Again, that's www.roseville.ca.us/gardening workshops. We also have a couple other webinars coming up. They're on that same webpage as well. The next one is in April, on Friday, April 16th, and that is entitled, "How Much is Too Much Water for Your Yard?" So that'll be a great way to learn how much water to use, and maybe you might be watering a little bit more than you need, than your plants truly need. And then we have another one coming up on Friday, May 14th, and that webinar is titled, "How to Keep Your Landscape Happy and Healthy." And then, of course, we do have webinars planned a little further out into the future, specifically that sheet mulching one that Becky was talking about coming up in October. So watch for those. Thank you all so much for joining us today. You will be receiving an email from us shortly, which will include a survey. And I would encourage all of you to take that survey. It's just a great way for us to know what works, what doesn't work, and give us some opportunities to improve. So thank you again so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your Friday and a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Bye.